welcome to the Blackhouse. You're here in the studio today. We're with Byron, and we have another special guest host, Samah. How are you guys doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Anything exciting happened in your week this week?
In my week this week?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing in my job, but, you know, the brands. I'm a research assistant. They do housing, or not, it's like building construction research.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like it's kind of related to the PhD, but kind of not at all.
Yeah.
It's all about net zero carbon in the construction industry.
Oh, good luck with that.
Interesting stuff. I'm just doing one small segment of the stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So
are they really do you really think that the construction industry is gonna go clean?
See, this is again we follow up on a conversation for last week, right?
Right.
For me, it depends on the system, it depends on the incentives.
Oh, true.
As long as you keep it market-based incentives, things probably aren't going to change.
Yeah.
Or if you do make it market-based incentive but change it's possible. Uphill battle. It's very doable. They got plans in place, but it's a very uphill battle.
Yeah.
I have faith because I think there's because what's the alternative, right?
Yeah. I suppose.
Yeah.
I I just saw that it was such a mess because I worked in construction and in mining. It's such a messy industry. It's just like mining is so messy on the environment.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody out there is out there just to make their dollar. But
yeah, so that's what I mean in terms of like things can change, but that idea of making the dollar first and foremost needs to be put to the back and have our future and you know, clean construction as the number one focus to go for its own sake. The financial side can help be an incentive, but you really have to flip things around quite a lot. So there's definitely ways that can be done, and Brand is doing amazing work with it, but it's a very uphill battle that I'm actually very glad to be part of, even if it's just a tiny little bit, to be honest.
I agree with you. I think that, like, what's the other alternative, that we have no hope? Do you know what I mean? It's like that new airline that is trying to go, was it like zero carbon as well?
An airline?
I think it's,
I haven't heard of that.
I think it's in New Zealand, but it's by a certain like decade that they're trying to go zero carbon.
Yeah, I think it's earlier than the others, right? Like it's 2040.
Now they're competing to be green, you know. Now it's
like
we're going green before them.
Yeah, that's what I mean in terms of like if that becomes the way the market functions, it's possible, but that still doesn't change the system overall. You know,
no.
But we can use competition to try and get people to change, but it's
it's not a long term successful.
Yeah. So I mean, in short, the week was good, but that's a bit of a struggle. But hey, you know, I'm happy to be in paid employment, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah, good on you. I mean, like, you know, without money, the world doesn't go around,
exactly.
Unfortunately. What about you, Samah? What you been up to this week?
Study, you know how it is. You know how it is as well.
I vaguely remember.
Yeah, you remember the dark days. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, me, a study book, 2 kids under 15.
Wow, okay, that was darker than the...
Yeah, it's a lot darker than that.
So I'm not complaining anymore. It was fine.
You're like, I wasn't expecting that.
Working part-time.
Yeah.
On top of that.
No, but it's good though. You feel, I mean, personally for me, I have a lot less responsibility, so I feel a lot, like, freer.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to study in the sun and, like, enjoy the weather.
Yeah, take your time with it, right?
And I'm looking forward to spring.
I'm just so glad summer's coming back. Like, I was done with the bad weather, and I'm really excited about some of the things that are coming up, like the Miss Africa New Zealand competition. I've been following that along and sharing their posts. Yeah. And we're going to be talking to them next week, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, talking to the organisers. And also, I'm really excited about this project that Afro Days and the Songwriter's Diary are doing to talk about the music industry for, you know, getting Afro New Zealanders more knowledge about the music industry and how to break in and get supported and stuff like that. And I'm not a musician myself, but I'm just really, really interested. So I've signed myself up for it just to maybe go and learn because, I'd really like to engage more with our local Afro artists as well. So, put them on. We've got to put them on.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're gonna go to a part 2 now of well, now what are we calling it? Are we calling it racism and renting? What are we calling it, Byron? calling it?
I mean, I think for this today, I think it'll just be more reflections on experiences in the rental sector, while having race identity as a focal point. Because even when it comes to about housing, we see the narratives and conversations in the media being all about price or affordability is a big thing, but there's never that issue of this is how it disproportionately affects the different ethnic groups. It's always the middle class or working class white people that tend to take front and center.
Yeah.
And in my mind today, we can talk about those same issues, but we need to start centering race as a determining factor for people's lives when it comes to housing. So that's why I think reflections upon experiences with racism as a focal point.
I mean, it's not like renters are not demonized enough in the media, like so many of those shows that center around, there's horrible people that rent this apartment.
Yeah.
And then every time they show anything about that apartment, it looks like, the hoarder lives there or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, I've rented all my life and I have never lived in such squalor.
Yeah.
So like that continual demonization of those that are renting and that being so normalized.
And I think with this, it's putting a voice and a face to people who are actually in rent, rather than being like, the media controls that narrative of, it's the poor landlord that has to bear the burden of this really, really poor renter.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
it's
actually,
pretty a lot of those poor landlords are so
pretty poor landlords. So like this is part of that whole idea of changing the narrative and having people themselves tell their own stories.
Okay, well, let's jump into it.
Yeah.
I know you've done some research for the stuff today, so we're gonna pat it over there while I do my DJ Vlad thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the spotlight is on Samah today. So I mean, the way I thought we'd do this, we would have like a bit of back and forth, but I really want your story to come through. I want your story to be a mainstay of what we're having a conversation about today. Broadly about racism, and then housing being those experiences within there. So, I mean, first of all,
thank you. I appreciate the spotlight.
That's
great.
I mean, just tell us about yourself first.
About myself?
Yeah, what you've been up to, what you do.
What I do, where I'm from.
Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Samah. I'm from Somalia and Yemen. I study educational psych at Victoria, and I also work part-time. Sorry, I have 2 part-time jobs. I work at the Ethiopian restaurant, everyone knows it, Mother of Coffee, and it's great. And I also work with kids at a nature school. I love what I study. I like to find lots of themes of my culture and when it comes to psychology and human development, and that's my biggest focus. It is how we are impacted by like socialization and like having specific meat suits that people see and they're like, nah, I don't like that one, and not gonna give that one as many benefits as this one, and why that is, and also how it affects real people and in time, throughout childhood, how that manifests. So that's basically what I'm into.
That's cool. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I'm really impressed that you're getting into psychology. I think we need more people of colour in psychology.
Yeah, we
definitely.
do. Yeah,
definitely.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%.
So as a student, I assume your living circumstances are probably not owning a home.
Hell
right?
no. Sorry, can I say that?
Yeah.
Hell no.
Yeah, so I mean, moving then into a housing conversation, because I know that a large conversation that we tend to have around renting is student circumstances and living conditions for students. Especially around the narrative around just be grateful you have a place. Tell us about your first question.
My experience?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I do have really, really good examples. The first time I moved out, I was 18, and I found it so hard to find a flat that I had to settle for a hostel.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I lived. It wasn't horrible. But it was kind of dangerous. I think now that I reflect back and I look at the times that were there and kind of people that I was around and that were living around me, I'd say, and the things that happened in that apartment. That's my first experience. But I've moved back and forth a few times, and now I'm settled. I live with my sister, my little sister. We live together on basically off Taranaki Street in a city apartment.
Yeah.
Did you find that it was you're living with your sister now? Did you find that that's something you had to do? Like it was just an easier not transition to make, but you felt safer living with someone that they understand your culture, that's within your culture, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think moving out is a big thing in so many ways, and also it's really it's quite lonely, first of all, like kind of being a black person in New Zealand most of the time, some of the time out in the world, and then your living quarters as well. Like if you grow up raised by family and you're constantly hearing like music, food's being cooked, all this stuff, and then you move into a flat. I've lived in a few flats in the past couple of years before this one, and sometimes it just hasn't gone down well with cultural things, or just in general, you know, it's just not the vibe for me. And people are great, but it's just not the right thing for me.
No, I get that completely.
Could you talk a bit more about that? Like, what do you mean by like? I mean, I don't want to pry too much. But what specifically happened in those circumstances?
If I don't like to.
Yeah,
totally. Well, I remember I was living on a different flat in Taranaki Street, a bit more up, and I was living in a flat with about maybe like 3 different girls. And one of the girls was of Asian descent, and then it was me, and then there was the rest were Pākehā girls. And it was like pretty nice at the beginning, but I remember there was lots of racism thrown in, like the longer I stayed in. It started with the other girl. I heard things about like when she wasn't around, they'd be like, oh, her cooking is so stinky, and like, oh, like, have you seen the set of her room? Like, she's so... And it just kind of got worse and worse, and they tried to slip it in like it was like a ha-ha.
A joke.
I know, and then I heard from her that things about me were being kind of said as well, because I like to listen to music and cook, obviously not blasting it, but I like to listen to music and cook, and at that time I was feeling kind of lonely, like missing my family, missing my language, wasn't really hearing it every day. So yeah, things like that. I think that's more within the renting, like in the house space. But it's also there when you're trying to rent. You know what I mean?
Right. So when you say it's there trying to rent, like, is that, do you mean in terms of it was quite difficult to get a place, and do you think your race and skin colour played a role in that as well?
I do, and I think that anyone that says that it doesn't play even the slightest role needs to read up a bit on it, because I remember being quite young and I was really naive. This was when I was first looking for...
Pull the mic closer to you.
Oh, sorry. When I was first looking for flats, I would, you know how what you do, you go on Marketplace or whatever, or you go on Trade Me, and I'd like write up all the emails, and then you'd show up and there'd be the house viewing. And I remember the treatment difference when you'd go in. I don't know about you guys, but
definitely seen it.
So you'd walk in, and the first time it kind of had me shook. Like, I didn't know it was that, because I lived with Housing New Zealand like most of my life, being a refugee, moving here with my family, and then moving out for university. I was like, oh, you know, like my friend that I was moving out with, she was Pākehā. She was like, oh, this is gonna be great. We're gonna do good. When I went on my own, I got treated very differently from when she was with me. Totally. Like, just the way that they even kind of looked at me sometimes when I would go up and be like, hi, can I apply for this flat? Like, oh, yeah, just go onto the online thing. And they'd be like, see ya, you know?
Like, and there was no, like, because, you know, you see these landlords when they think they like somebody, they actually have a bit of a banter with them when they go and look at the flats, and you kind of notice the cold shoulder.
Totally.
There's almost like they're like, oh, but you don't represent Kiwi culture to me, so I'm going to have a conversation.
Can you afford, like, you know, it's not everybody, and when it does happen, you immediately notice, like, if they're talking to a person before you, and then you go up. And I'd like to say I'm quite a friendly person most of the time, so, like, when I talk to people, I like, especially if I'm, like, trying to banter with a landlord, like, I will talk to them. And so that coldness immediately resonates. You're like, okay, that's... Cool.
I mean, you mentioned that it wasn't every landlord that you come across, right?
No.
But do even the few that have that experience, does that kind of impact you quite a lot? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we've spoken about before we started about the impacts that racism has on us, and I imagine even if it's just 1 or 2 people out of 10, that's still enough to be like, oh, geez, I don't want to try that again. That really hurt.
It is. I did honestly. It has an impact, and it has an ongoing... I mean, also when you're young, I think, last week you were talking about the interpersonal racism, and how different people are that's going to affect them differently based off of, you know, their development and what is about, like, priority for them in that moment socially. And if you kind of come to terms with it and you've accepted it, or you've done work on it, and you've been like, okay, this is the state of the world, and mentally and spiritually, emotionally, I can not make peace with it, but I can accept that this is what it's like right now, and still want to make a change. If you have underlying, I don't know, I would say, like...
Or just like predispositions
as well, and also being young and rejection sensitive, or just let down by your
Or
study.
just like
yeah.
hoping the best out of people, right? Like
Totally.
as you do as a young person, like, oh, I grew up believing this humanity is good or A, B, and C, and then you get confronted with that, and it can be quite jarring, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I completely agree, and I think, I mean, if we're talking based on my personal example with those those landlords, I would say that when I first went to look for flats, I was pretty optimistic, and I knew that I was out of place because obviously I'd walk in and I would be pretty out of place, but I would still be like, cool, they're still gonna mostly give me a fair chance. You know, you're like, I'm not naive. I'm expecting something. Yeah. But you don't expect it to be that in your face, especially when someone owns something. I think they have a lot more grounds to be scrutinizing and like discerning. Yeah. Not really, but they think they do. So you know, I think that judgment is a lot more clear and apparent because they're like, no, I own this house. Yeah. So do you actually like, you know, do you deserve it? Like, I've been asked, like, do you have a job? Yeah. Like before? Like when I've been...
Right. Oh, you've been asked that?
Yeah. And I'm like, no, I'm studying. Yeah. Just like most people are.
Yeah, most people my age who are looking for a job, or looking for a flat in this position.
And you think that the most important thing is, can you pay the rent?
Yeah.
And if you can pay the rent, how you get that money is, like, how is that important to the landlord?
No.
You know what I mean? Like, if you're able to pay your rent every week, that should be the only thing they're concerned about. But also, like,
who gets those questions? Who gets asked the question, so how are you getting this money? You know, if I turned up as a white dude in a suit, they'd just be like, you're fine. I could be a drug dealer, I don't know. But they're not going to bother asking that question, right?
Yeah, totally, I agree. And I think I've been to viewings and seen people that are, like, for example, those first few instances impacted me in a way where I'd be like, okay, now I've got to dress up. Now I've got to really present myself extra. You know, not extra, like, you know, glam, but like extra, like, sophisticated and, you know, I'm civilized. Yeah. We all are, but like, you know, I've really got to put that across. Yeah. And so, that was a big deal for me, and it's kind of still, I'm unlearning that now because that started with looking for flats, and then it turned into, like, you know, university and job interviews and things like that, and being interviewed by people of different race who might see you as not deserving, or maybe not even that. It's sometimes even subconscious, and you realize that a person isn't trying to be overtly rude or judge you, but you still see it, and they still say something, and you're like, okay, I can kind of see that ideas.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with all my parents, my brother, and my wife before, that people don't mean ill. They're just very ignorant when it comes to certain things, right? I've had an instance where my someone, because my wife is white, and we were at this event, and someone said to her, they were trying to ask where I was from. Okay. And I was like, okay, you're curious. Yeah. Fine, I don't mind. The thing that annoyed me actually was that she then looked at my wife and was like, is it okay to ask where he's from? And I was like,
asking your wife.
I'm a person. Like, I'm right here. You can ask me if it's okay.
Ask me the question.
I will tell you if I'm okay with that or not. I am, because I'll chew your ear off with where I'm from. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you. But it was that sentiment of, it almost felt like I was her pet. It felt like I was her pet being showed off to these.
It's that whole privilege thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's like they defer to your partner as if your partner has more right to speak on your behalf,
or more humanity than we have, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, the thing is, I knew she didn't mean ill at all by it, but the impact was still the same. You know, even if she doesn't mean ill, even if these landlords don't mean ill, the impact that they have when they ask you, so how are you going to pay? Like, do you have a job? Like, are you clean? Like, what do you cook? You know, sometimes they don't mean ill, obviously sometimes they do, but the impact is still the same regardless of your intent, right? Yeah. Like, you walk away being like, man, that really hurt. I don't want to do that experience again.
Especially when you're young. And I think throughout all ages, I'm not saying that this is only, like, concentrated to younger people. I think at any age, it's always jarring, you know?
Yeah.
And also, while you're still, like, developing and you're trying to build competence, I think for, you know, like, ethnic youth who are trying to make life at university or move into a different city and get a job, things like that, in white-dominated spaces, are going to be met with resistance, and it's not intentional, like you said, not always intentional, it's not always known or conscious, and the effect is still...
I think the thing is, it's so hegemonic to the culture, the Kiwi culture, is that we don't even realise, or people, I would say that, you know, those good-minded people don't even realise when they're doing it. You know, like I had this interesting exchange with my cousin. I hadn't seen her for 20 years, and I don't know if she's just done a bit of education in the background. And she just came up to me and she said, you know what, I'm really sorry about what happened to you when you were a kid. I didn't understand it then, but now I understand it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's somebody that's what I call an ally. Somebody who's actually done the time to do the work. You know what I mean? To actually understand how racist perceptions and things of that nature, which you can experience in renting, and that actually lands on people when they have to go through it.
Yeah.
Because I know for myself, you know, having had that experience of homelessness, having had experiences very similar to yours, I had trauma about actually finding housing in the private sector. And when we were in Australia, we moved about 8 times. And that wasn't because of anything that we did. It was because the changeover in the market was so fast. So houses kept getting sold. Or units were getting sold. So we had to always move. And the turnover is just incredibly fast in Perth. So every, year I had to deal with this stuff that I didn't have to deal with in New Zealand, because in social housing you don't tend to move much. Like you get into social housing and you stay there.
One of their goals is to keep you stable, because they know that destabilization, that's a trigger for like long-term feelings of like it reiterates like helplessness, feeling hopeless and unstable, and not having a safe space. So
Did you feel like as you were going through these different places in the private rental sector as a student, did you feel like those feelings? Did you have those feelings of like not hopelessness, but feeling displaced and feeling like, oh, I have to go through this process again?
Yeah.
And each time, did you feel like each time it was more triggering as you went through it?
Yeah. I mean, right now I have a lovely landlord, and she's amazing, and she's really caring and cool, and she's great. But before her, I've had a few, and I've definitely felt that way. I've felt like I dreaded, like I knew I needed to find a flat, and I've dreaded, like I've procrastinated, like even like went by Sam a lot, and sometimes I do when I feel like someone's gonna bring up my name and make me uncomfortable. I go by Sam because it would make the landlords feel more comfortable. And they'd be like, Sam, I like that, and I've heard that before. And like, that's easy to remember. And so things like that, just to make them feel more comfortable around me, because this is if it was any other situation, it's things like these where it's like housing, healthcare, we all need it. And so you kind of are willing to like let go a bit of yourself in order to get it, and even when you're feeling helpless and hopeless, you're like, well, I still need a place to be. And some people just get pushed so far that they just don't do that anymore, because they've been rejected by private sector or whoever, and it's disheartening, and it's bad.
I think I've only ever rented in the private sector once in New Zealand, and that was just before I went to Oz. And I think that time we were pretty lucky, because the landlord wasn't too bad, and I was kind of on my way out of the country. So we downsized, but no, other than that, no, the private sector and me are, unless, like, I wish it wasn't that we had to make ourselves smaller in order to be accepted. I would like to be, like you see all these Karens out there that really, they're the most awfulest neighbours, and they have a house and they can rent. I would like to be just, Black Karen, and, treat every situation like that. That would be really freeing.
I mean, the funniest thing is, like, my wife always says to me, like, oh, like, why didn't you say something? And I was like, because when I say something, things get worse.
I
was like, there are consequences to things that I do, And the thing is, like, love our wife to bits, obviously, but she's a white woman from New Zealand, you know. She knows a lot, but sometimes she's kind of like, why didn't you say something? I'm like, because every time I say something, they think I'm an angry black man. So I'm not gonna. And I love that. I love what you said in terms of like that making yourself smaller. I'd like to talk a bit more about that in terms, especially because this is a good example of it. You kind of chip away at your dignity in certain ways. You chip away at your culture, you chip away at who you are to make other people feel more comfortable in the space, right?
I personally hate that.
That's
the way I see, like, a lot of, especially, I don't know if it's just this generation or what, they do tend to like acquiesce a bit. and I sort of think to myself, and I don't know, because I am older, so you've got that much more experience and that much more time to get sick of it.
Yeah.
So you just, you're just like, no, I'm not going to make myself smaller for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very hard. Like I'll see a lot of young non-white kids just try really hard to fit in, and like I understand that. Like like you said, as I've gotten older, like I'm 29 now. As from 25 onwards, I was like, I just don't care that much anymore. Yeah, I'm gonna be who I am, and if you have an issue with that, then fine. I'll work really hard to get myself in a financially stable position. If you don't like me, that's not my business. You do what you want. But growing up as a teenager, that was one of the biggest things. Just trying to fit in, just trying not to be noticeable, trying not to stand out, just trying to be. I just want to be. When I went to the States, one of the coolest things I actually really enjoyed was being invisible.
Totally.
No one noticed me. No one was the best thing ever.
You're just another person,
right?
Yeah, no one's
great.
staring too long. They just
Funnily enough, in Australia, there's actually a growing identity of the African Australian. So like, it doesn't feel like you stand out like a sore thumb over there either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's more acceptance of the identity somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's an underrated experience that we don't get to have, like in terms of like it's underrated, its impact on us in terms of really standing out and really being kind of not. I mean, it implies that you're a problem, right? Like that's part of what it is. And did you feel like as you were renting, that's kind of how people saw you? Like they're like, what potential problem are you going to create?
Totally, I felt like I had to neutralize a lot of beliefs that people had maybe like built up over their life about me. So like saying like, oh yeah, I work before they even ask me, and things like that, proving myself so that I feel like I've got an upper hand. But I also think that I also have the privilege of like my growing up here as well. So there's always something, but race is a really big part of it, and I think it would be great to live in sometimes in the US maybe it's safer, but
sometimes
to be invisible like that.
I think that growing up in New Zealand, I think we tend to look at the USA or someplace, or UK even, as the city of Oz, like that wonderful place that one day you can get to, and suddenly you won't have to think about being black anymore. Yeah. But I personally think we need to work on the stuff we are right now.
Aspects of, like the States is cool. The States was cool for me in the sense of like it was nice to be just another black guy that no one cared about. Yeah. But the other side was the people existing there who were homeless, or the people who were struggling, or people in really low wage jobs were black as well, Yeah. So it's like there's so many aspects to being black in the States. If you're a middle class black person, it probably is really nice, like it's cool. I mean, I went there with a bit of money, so it was cool. I was on holiday, it was cool. It's great. But it's very different from, oh cool, I'm just like a middle class black dude in this space, no one notices me, versus, well, everyone who I see who is homeless tends to be black, So there's really harsh systemic issues that go on there. But I do agree with you in terms of like, I think there isn't a narrative, or the narrative isn't as strong in New Zealand around experiences of black people here. There's bits and pieces of work here and there, but it's not a huge narrative as in like, oh, this is a group of people that exist here, they matter, and we're forming an Afro-Kiwi identity, we're still a relatively young ethnic group in New Zealand. Obviously there's been a long history of it, but there's been big people, big squads of people coming in the 90s.
Thank you for saying it's so long, because like some people have cognitive dissonance about saying that there were Africans here before 1990. You know what I mean? And yes, there was. Get over yourselves.
And
I was here.
And the emphasis should be that it's gotten bigger in the 1990s, but it's always been a thing. And you're a very good example of that too, that people who are African have existed here, and now that's part of our story,
Being invisible.
And in a
champion of
it. In a very negative way though. Being invisible has two sides to it. It's like great to disappear into the crowd and not be pointed and go, you're exotic, you're weird. But being invisible in terms of your rights don't matter because of who you are, there's two sides to it,
Anyway, I'm going to go to a song break now, and we're going to play Perfect Timing and this is BBGB, Manu Crooks, Blessed Be Wise, Kwame, and Little Spacely. This is our West Sydney posse, I suppose you call it. And this is their track, Perfect Timing. Back on the Blackhouse. And we've got another guest that's joined us. This Blayz is back again, co-hosting with us, and we're going to kick the conversation off where we left it. Yeah?
where did we leave it?
We were talking about racism, rental market, and so, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. I was thinking with Blayz here now, Blayz has got any interesting stuff that he caught at the end of that conversation if he wants to join in. Like, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything.
Hey, man, it's like this, right? Like, I remember back when I used to be a uni student too as well. Like, I was studying chiropractic in Auckland. In ZCC. And we had this situation where we had, a landlord that was living just right behind us. And it was kind of weird, because, like, the landlord, lived just outside behind, in the backyard. And she always tried to be racist to us. In the kind of ways that she'd come over without telling us, giving us notice, because by law you have to, you have to come give notice, like 2 weeks notice and stuff.
Yeah.
And all of us were all like, it was myself, another South African, Caucasian South African, and some Malaysian dude and a Korean dude,
Right.
But this landlord was Indian, and all the time she would just pop over for no reason and give us a privacy.
What did she think you guys were doing? Like, why did she feel the need to
because
do
like we were studying, we were like hardcore studying, So during the study time, all we did was study.
Yeah.
And then when it was holiday time, it was time for us to get loose.
Yeah.
Like most
But
people
that's
do.
the thing is that's what most Kiwi students do.
Yeah.
So why is it different when you do it to when Pākehā New Zealand students do it?
Yeah, they
Why
do it
should
all
it
the
be
time,
done
but
different?
because it's even down in Otago as well.
Were you down there in Otago?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that's where Jenny
That's
was.
party capital, though.
And they're like couches down there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you guys remember that time when it was on CNN?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, well, they had that
Because it was in the street,
500,
right? Yeah.
Buying couches on the street.
They
and
burned
stuff.
couches,
Was that you guys?
vans and all of that.
There's
That happened.
obviously not much to do in Otago, so you go through your couches.
No.
Yeah.
The thing was, people get drunk and get out of control.
Yeah.
But still, though, some people can do that stuff and get away with it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some people can't.
Yeah.
So for us, I was there, but I never did anything.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't burn it.
It's clear.
I think a topic we touched on in the first segment just before the break was, I think implied that we as Africans have to operate under different rules, right? Like we get different standards within, we get different behaviors. Do you guys feel like that's the case? Like, obviously you used the example just now, of people can burn couches and get away with it, and then if we're even near the couch that's burning, didn't do anything.
Yeah,
you must be
you're going to be blamed for it.
Yeah.
Like I was actually in a club in Sydney, and an Asian girl and a white girl got into a fight, and I got kicked out.
I'm sorry, what?
An Asian girl and a white girl got into a fight, throwing wine glasses at each other,
Damn.
and I'm the one that got kicked out. I had nothing to do with the fight.
That makes no sense.
No sense, but I was in the vicinity,
Yeah.
so I must be the agitator. And one thing I noticed about Sydney too is that you don't see that many Indigenous Australians in the clubs.
Right.
And the funny thing about that incident was that was a place where they played dance hall. It was a dance hall club, and it happened in the bar where all the Africans and Jamaicans and all that were there. But when I'm in Australia, I sometimes approximate Aboriginal. Like people mistake me for being Aboriginal. So it was either like must have been me that because that's the what do you call it, the colloquial racism that goes on there. It's far more harsher on Indigenous folk. And so you had these Jamaicans with these dreadlocks come out, and they're like looking at me, and I'm like, why am I getting kicked out?
Right.
I wasn't even in the fight. I just happened to be standing next to her.
Hey, I don't mean to go off topic, but that kind of situation just happened to me in Wellington over here. Like, just down Courtney Place. It's one of the off street.
Yeah.
And basically, me and my brother were just going out clubbing and stuff, and I just ran out of smoke cigarettes,
Yeah.
And I tried to ask someone on the street for a cigarette.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, it was like, I'm sick of you immigrants coming here get a job. No, go back to where you came from. I was like, bro.
You could have just said no.
Yeah, my man. Like,
the next thing you know, the cops are coming and straight away, as soon as they got on the spot, I'm the one getting arrested. You know? This video might be online somewhere, but there was a lot of cameras. I could see it, but I'm just like, what the hell?
Yeah, I just wanted a cigarette, man. Like, chill.
It's know, and it's really interesting how the different stereotypes of being a person of colour, whether you're African or Māori or Pacific Polynesian or in New Zealand, how those stereotypes land in different situations. You know what I mean? I think renting. Yeah. I think in the renting, how we're talking about the renting situation, there's some really messed up perceptions about who and what are black people in this country and how do we function around them. You know what I mean? Like, everybody has to suddenly adjust somehow, and not us. I mean, they have to suddenly adjust themselves somehow.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, in my head, I kind of see that as like recalibrating to like what someone else deems is acceptable. Or like like you said, everyone has like different. They have different standards. Some people have different standards for African people or people of like from ethnic minorities, and we can either choose to comply with those and like recalibrate, but eventually, I mean, the studies show that, especially if you're a child, like you are kind of put into an emotional situation where you do comply and it sets in, and long term, even your personality can change depending on what kind of racism you've encountered or what. I don't know.
Or what are the responses to racism that you've seen when you've been growing up?
Totally.
Like, I got two very different ones because, my mum married basically a guy who was really in his feels about being a white and being this supremacist. Like, he was a real out of the box character. So I saw that really extreme level of racism, and then I saw the way that people responded to it within Māori and Pacific Island cultures, which was mainly you stand up to it, but it wasn't like we were intellectualizing it. I spent most of my time at university trying to find the words to express and understand the racism that I was experiencing. I didn't want it to be like, how you deal with the racist is you punch him in the head. And you got to keep punching him in the head, and every day you got to punch him in the head. You don't, because that's how you end up in jail, right?
Like that.
So I went through that stage of responding to racism with violence, and then I got to the stage where I wanted to respond to racism with intelligence. And I think that's where in New Zealand we don't have, we just need more of our own language talking about what this is right here.
Yeah, we need more of our own stories.
Instead of trying to compare it to Australia or UK or,
I'm sorry, Leah, but there's this thing going on, because for us, I know you've brought this up before. There's been Africans before, this generation of here, but they always try to compare us to UK or USA, but we Africans, and we like building our own culture as we go along,
we are. We're in that process.
We're always mistaken for what we do, whatever we do. They try and compare us to other places that they are known, but we're young and new.
It's almost it's almost like they need like a point of reference when we can't just exist on our own.
Exactly. And I think that the point of reference has always been where the most literature was coming from. So if most of the literature was coming out of UK or most of the literature was coming out of US, then we compare it to that. But really, what racism looks like in New Zealand is also really different to what it looks like in Australia. And that's our neighbour, you know what I mean? Like, Australians are really in your face. Like, if they don't like you, you're going to know about it. And I think with New Zealanders, we tend to suppress those feelings or opinions and put on that, that fake smile.
Totally.
The smile that means nothing.
Stop, I hate that smile.
Everything's awkward here. I don't want to be awkward.
Strange.
And so that in itself actually deserves sort of some analysing just in it, like on its own, standing on, like you said, standing on its own. Like we can't always be comparing ourselves to other places that have different things that are impacting it. There might be some similarities, but I also part of me feels like constantly comparing ourselves to America. We're like, hey, they carry guns in America. We have guns in New Zealand, but we're not as profuse as they are over there. But mind you, I'm having second thoughts about Christchurch. There's too much gunplay going down there, Christchurch. Like, you guys really need to pull your head in.
Hey, can I just still like step in like right quick while you're talking about how, because like I'll say it, like for New Zealand, it's actually better off their way, because like if myself being a South Sudanese, if I do go over to Australia, I cannot go and hang out with like other, tribes that are from Sudan as well.
Which town are you talking about? Are you talking about Melbourne?
Not just any town. It's like the whole place. I cannot just go there and just hang around with people from different tribes. It's like they all, like tribalism got taken from there and brought there as well.
Yeah.
But over here, I can just hang out with whoever I want to, Yeah. So it kind of works out both ways, like New Zealand is good for that.
I think what's really interesting about the conversation we're having now is, like, we as Africans in New Zealand need to start, well, not to start, we're doing that anyway. This is what this is, we're having conversations for ourselves, right? And creating the narratives of what we are. Because as a diasporic population, we're pretty unique, because there's New Zealand is on the end of the world, no borders, we're having, so like us as Africans can start to have our own conversations about what racism's like here.
For sure.
Maybe not, I don't want to get back on the topic of renting so much, but I want to talk more about like what do we see as the nature of racism here? Like we've just spoken about how it's different from Australia or the UK. There's parallels to be drawn, but what do we find is unique about New Zealand? Well, like I have my own opinions. I'm sure you guys have your opinions too.
And in New Zealand, the thing I found out is that there's racism, but people don't want to talk about it. That's the thing. There's racism is definitely there. I went on radio a few years ago, talked about it. I don't know if people listen, but I just try to point it out, because like I'm the kind of guy. I will not bow down and tell no lies about stuff that I feel are important, but it always gets swept under the carpet, for some reason.
Like that attitude that it's not really a problem here.
They kind of clean green.
For those that don't get affected, those are the people that just push under the carpet. But for someone like me, I've always felt it. I just wake up and just move on with the day. But
what kind of feelings, like, because you say, obviously you feel that kind of stuff, like what kind of examples and stuff do you have? Like, obviously you explained that you got, some guy started abusing you on the street, then you got arrested.
I'll give you, like, me and a couple of my friends, we call ourselves the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Usual suspects.
The usual suspects.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like, one time I'm like, back, I don't know why it always comes back to chiropractic, but I was coming back from uni, and I just got a bus, and my uncle had the key. So I was like, okay, you can pick me up from, I was living in Botany Downs in Auckland. But I caught the bus and stopped in Otahu, and I was like, okay, sweet. You can pick me up off the road. He was like, okay, sweet. And I just jumped off the bus, and all of a sudden, these cops come over and just...
Out of nowhere.
You fit the description of this guy that had done this and that.
Right. The usual suspects. I know that. I used to call that.
Because there was another black dude or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I used to call that driving while, like I had those experiences driving while black.
Yeah.
And then you get pulled over. I got pulled over once in my friend's car, because mine was in the shop. He was fully licensed, fully registered, fully warranted. I have a full license. I get pulled over and they checked my license and I said, why did I get pulled over? And they said, because you're wearing a hoodie. And I'm like, what, there's a dress code for driving? Like, what's the dress code?
That wasn't on the road code.
Yeah, it's not in the road code, right? But you get pulled over and the reason is because you're wearing a hoodie. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Right, usual suspects, I think you call that.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
Yeah.
That's
How do you find racism in New Zealand, Sam?
I find it really interesting because I think it shows up in cultures differently. Like we all know, but it's a mixture of like the history of the country and just I don't know how to explain the approach of the people, the majority, obviously, and the psychology of people. I think here we tend to minimize, like you said, we minimize pretty much everything. I think we minimize so many social issues, and this is
like it's not a big deal. It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good. It's fine. Oh, it took some land. She'll be right. Everything is minimized, and this is one of the biggest things. And it's easier because we have such a smaller population in comparison. But I think it shows up. It's kind of a bit. Personally, I think the one that you're talking about in Australia, it's a lot more on your face. Pretty damaging. This one that we have here, I think it's sometimes a bit more convoluted because you don't know if it's benign or if it's in your or if someone's meaning, like the fake smile, but they're saying something that is totally
isn't
not
making
okay.
sense.
And so you're going home like gaslighting yourself, questioning like was that a valid experience?
Or
That's how I kind of see it. I kind of see it as a lot more convoluted.
It's almost like sinister in that sense, right? Like
I think it's more sinister.
It's almost like deeply psychological. It's spiritual, almost like you're walking away being like, "Damn, that was painful," but I don't know why it was painful.
Yeah, I could handle the Australian thing only because it reminded me more of my childhood, where everything was a scrap.
Right.
Everything was a fight.
And you had a response to it. You knew how to respond.
Yeah, I knew how to respond to that. But as we've become more and more PC here, it's become, you don't know if you're offending somebody by saying like, that really annoys me, or that really upsets me, and that's really frustrating me. You just don't know how that's going to land, I think. For just taking up space like that. You know?
Before I say this, I'll just say rest in peace, brother. Dow, by Tim. One other thing is like, you know, on the news, we'll be watching news and stuff, and people go missing, they get reported on the news and stuff. My brother went missing, and I tried to call, you know, different radio stations and stuff like that, try to get them to get the information out there for the people. And they said they couldn't do it, right? And I'm like, this happens all the time. On the news is people reported missing and stuff, right? Yeah, and they kept bringing this up all the time, and I'm like, oh, why in my neighborhood, in Wainui, just next to Nana where I live, a dog goes missing, the whole community goes looking for them.
For the dog.
For the dog, and not a person, you know, I'm like, what?
I'm sorry to hear that, man.
It was crazy, but, you know, but there's the kind of things that I mean, like, the racism is there, but people just don't know that.
It's not. I think it's that they don't want to acknowledge it. Like, I think it's deliberate. Like, I actually think that sort of thing is really deliberate. And I don't think it's unconscious. And I think when we talk about unconscious bias, that's just giving them a break, giving that behaviour a break.
Even about the whole 100% pure New Zealand. Like, I could personally take you to places where, like, you'd be like,
there's no such thing as 100% pure New Zealand. This is the country of everything mixed up.
Advertisers.
Sorry, I just wanted to say really quickly, when you said when you said that when someone's talking about like racial things and they're being covert, whereas like when someone's being a bit less in your face about it, it almost is a bit safer for them, because if you can't identify it as like clear racism, they can also kind of get away with it. They can
deny it.
I didn't really mean that, or it's easier to kind of slip away with these things.
I don't understand.
The kind of racism that we have here is a bit more.
Or they blame you. And
I think it's more insidious.
Like you misinterpret it. You know, that's one of the big things that I've experienced, is that people say, "Oh no, you didn't understand what I meant." I'm like, "Oh man, I've been through a lot of this. I know what you mean when you say it, but it's easy to get away with being like, oh no, you didn't understand that. You didn't know what I meant. I didn't mean it like that." And then I don't want to start a debate with someone. I'm just like, "Oh man, you can do what you want. I'll leave you alone."
I mean, this whole stereotype of angry black woman or angry woman of colour is so perverse down here, and even in Australia, like that stereotype that when we are being injured or hurt or offended against or abused or whatever, we're not really listened to in the same way, and we're not considered in the same way as those that can identify as Pākehā. So I know so many, you know, women of colour, and that's including, you know, Māori and Pacifica people as well, that just are not considered in the same way that they consider white women and their safety and concern, and I think that's that can have a long-term effect on the way you feel you can front up to the world every day. And you either end up withdrawing, becoming over the top, trying to make yourself the center of attention, or you end up like being angry a lot of the time.
Emotional problems, like definitely.
How much time do we have?
Oh, we got about 4 minutes.
Cool. I want to throw something out there, and I just want to see just people interact with it. So, I mean, when I'm listening to this, part of what I think is that I personally think that whiteness and white culture, white norms is so deeply entrenched into this country that anything else gets shut down, which combines with that tall poppy syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what do people think? I just want you to interact with that idea, because I think that whiteness is so deeply entrenched that racism isn't even racism, because people are like, oh, that's just how it is. That's just normal, you know? But for us, we see it, we interact with it. And I just think it's because it's so deeply rooted into what New Zealand is. You know, that white norms, white power, white supremacy, that everything else is deviant outside of that. I just wanted to see what do you guys think about that?
Okay.
I think in my mind it usually goes back to how dangerous it can be emotionally here. I mean, I think in other countries, I mean, here you're still facing threats physically, obviously, and like with your record and all these instances I've been hearing about and that I've been through too. But it's insidious, and it's really terrifying. I think when I think about children and their psyche and how they're going to develop and how it has you second guessing yourself, and that's really dangerous for the development of your self-esteem and for the development of like your healthy psyche as an adult. And then you've got to do then you reach teenagehood, and then you're really learning about the world, and it kind of further shuts you down. And so I honestly think that New Zealand has a lot of work to do, and we haven't had as large uprisings as they have in America. So I think that plays a part where it's been pretty bad, obviously, and we haven't overthrown the government completely yet recently. So like, there's a lot of work, and there's not many people noticing that there's a lot of work to be done.
I can agree with that.
What do you think?
I have nothing to say to that, because like what it is basically, like, we've been dealing with these issues, and some of us just fed up, but we just we're just trying to, you know, get a safe way to deal with this without getting into conflict with you know, society and the people in public in general. You know, some of us are just fed up, and we don't want to cause any problems in the neighborhoods and all of these.
You just want to live your life and earn your money.
You can always come on the Blackhouse, and I get all the hot.
I'm just saying,
drama for anything that happens. You guys are good.
We're those guys, so yeah, we don't want to get to that point where we have to have conflicts in the streets and stuff like that, you know, because like, you know, when enough is enough becomes enough, you know. So
I think it is. I know when I was in Australia, I found it very exhausting, even though I knew it was coming from. I knew what I was looking at. There wasn't any confusion there. Having to deal with it all the time just wore me out.
You're being dysregulated constantly, and I think that's the thing. You just constantly get tired of having to re-regulate your emotions.